everyone, and I am happy to be here with you. Today, I'm going to share with you strategies to build your ELLs listening skills. I'm going to share with you some simple strategies that can improve your ELLs listening comprehension. So, let's go ahead and dive into these strategies. Now, I want you all to know that I had this thing where I felt as if I was repeating myself over and over again for my ELLs. I felt as if it was never ending. Now, there have been times when I have been talking to my students, and I know I have said this 5.5 times already, and my students are still not listening and they're still not understanding. Now, if this is you, I want you to know that you might have a slight problem in your students' listening comprehension. Now, this can affect the students' comprehension skills and some of the assignments that they're struggling with in this language domain. Now, during this, I had a revelation. I always thought the listening domain was the easiest for students to achieve high scores and success. I mean, all it is listening and follow directions, right? This is where my thought process was for my students. And I want to tell you that I was so wrong. I was baffled when I got my student scores back and they were in the low 2s and the low 3s. I just knew my students were going to have the perfect scores in listening. Now, I couldn't help but think to myself, was it something in my instruction that I missed? Did I not teach an important concept or skill? I was just so frustrated at what I was doing. And I can literally hear myself screaming right now, what happened? What happened? What did I do? Now, after going in circles, I decided to take a moment and reflect and just research some things about listening. And I first reflected on this simple question, and I asked myself this. What was I doing in my class activities to improve my students' listening skills? I also reflected on, was I being intentional about the activities that I was doing with my students to improve and build on their listening skills? Now, if I'm being honest and completely transparent with you right now, I was not being intentional in my instruction with my students when it came to their listening comprehension. That's when I had a light bulb moment and decided that I needed to make a shift in my instruction. I started setting clear expectations with my students about the listening and that I will not be repeating myself 55 different times in a lesson. I did allow for students for follow-up questions, but this put the students in a position to pay close attention to what I was saying. My students also loved taking notes in class, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to take this note-taking activity and turn it into a listening activity. I would set the stage by telling students that I want them to imagine that they're in college and they're listening to a lecture, and that they are listening to the professor and that they're taking notes. My students would really get into character and even acted like future college students in a lecture hall. You all should have saw it. It was just so amazing to see. Now, I want to share some strategies for you for improving your ELL's listening skills. The first strategy that I'm going to share with you is to make sure that you're setting clear and high expectations with your students about listening. You want to create a listening rubric so students can have these clear expectations about what they need to be doing during the listening activities. I would also encourage you to set the expectation that you're not going to repeat yourself more than twice. Setting this expectation forces your students to tune in to what you're saying about the topic or the directions. The second strategy that I'm going to give you is make sure that you're intentional with your listening activities. For example, one thing that I have turned into a listening activity is that when I'm giving lecture or giving the students information, I have them take corner notes during the listening activity. You can even have your Cornell notes be interactive, like Cornell Doodle Notes. They're very popular, and my students love them. I also have sometimes the students watch an informational video about a topic. While they're watching a video, they can then fill in the blanks with key terms and definitions. For example, I recently did a lesson about a novel study, and the setting was during the Vietnam War. I had the students watch a documentary, and during the documentary, the students will be filling in blanks with questions that accompany the video. As the students were watching, they had to fill in these blanks. They had to fill in these questions. And if there was a time where I needed to stop and pause, I would let them do that to catch up if they needed it. You can also create listening questions about a reading lesson that you have done in class as well. Now, before we jump into the listening progress tracker, I want to share with you all that reading lessons are great to do. Reading listening activities are great to do, and I'm going to give you some details about how I implement them in my classroom. But I do this with a listening progress tracker. So I have students complete listening quizzes. And one way that you can do a listening quiz is by doing a read aloud. So the next time you're reading a text aloud, you can stop and ask a listening comprehension question. At the end of the read aloud, you can then have the students graph their progress. For example, if your students got 6 of the reading questions right or the listening questions right, then they will graph themselves as a level 6. If they got 5 of the reading questions right, or the listening comprehension questions right, then you will graph them, or they will graph themselves as a level 5. This will allow students to see their progress over time and then will motivate them to improve on their listening skills. This is a great activity to do with your ELLs. I love doing this activity with my students. One of the things that I am planning on doing with them is that I'm going to have a set amount. And before they do their language assessment this school year, I'm actually going to have my students review their progress as some type of a motivation for their language assessment and to set their goals. So I'm really excited about doing this with my students. Now, the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to brainstorm how you can be intentional in your listening activities with your ELLs. I also want you to create a simple listening activity for your students. I mean, it could be something as simple as you doing your read aloud and creating some comprehension questions. And if you're stuck on the comprehension questions, then you can always use balloons to give you some question starters, and it is a great way to differentiate for your students. And I want you to, if you're needing some listening activities that are ready to print and to go, you can go to myadventuresinESL.com/close reads to get you some close reading activities. In the close reading activities I have available, I have a listening section where you can practice your students' listening skills, and it already comes with a comprehension check for the students listening as well. Now, I would love to know, what are some of your favorite listening activities to do with your ELLs? Now, I know the read aloud and the Cornell notes are some of my absolute favorites, but I would love to know, what are some of your favorite activities to do with your ELLs? What is something that you love to do with them for their listening to improve and see their growth over time? So, once again, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I had a great time for you all. This is going to be uploaded on myadventuresinESL.com. You can go back and watch a replay as well. And if you have any questions, just feel free to email me at millie@myadventuresinESL.com. I will see everyone next week at 5:15 p.m. as we dive into our next topic. See you then. Bye.